Hey friends, this is Geoffrey Woo with the Health Via Modern Nutrition HVMN podcast. And today I'm really excited to speak with one of the cutting edge researchers trying to understand COVID-19 potential therapeutic routes and how that intersects with the topic we dearly care about, which is the ketogenic diet, that ketotic metabolic pathway, and how there might be an overlap here. So very excited to welcome Professor Samir Sukkar from Italy onto the program. Professor Sukkar, great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, dear Geoffrey. We started in March when there was the first COVID invasion in Europe, in particular in Italy. The pandemic started in Lombardy, and then just a few days after, also in Liguria. I'm from Genova. Genova is in the north of Italy, in the famous port from which Christopher Columbus left for America. So in our hospital, our university hospital, we had in that time, and now we have more than that time, a lot of COVID patients. So I started with a protocol with ketogenic diet, just because just in that period, one only paper was discussing about the cytokine storm. Cytokine storm now is very well studied, is well known, but in March, nobody was talking about it apart from a researcher in England, Meta. It was talking about the possibility to have a good treatment with immunosuppression. Very strange during a virus infection, but it was talking about this immunosuppression. So I was very interested about this. I am a nutritionist, a gastroenterologist nutritionist, and the chief of the unit of clinical nutrition in our university hospital. I was very attracted from this mechanism because according to the epidemiological data, diabetes, hypertension, and then later also obesity was key factors for the prognosis. And why this? In that period, I was thinking, what is the problem with diabetes? During diabetes, there is inflammation, but also then inflammation, chronic inflammation, NPO, in the cell are very strong, myeloperoxidase is strong. So there is also a high availability of glucose in diabetes, obviously, and particularly when there is an infection. There is a tight modification of the metabolism because the immunocyte also the hypoxia, but all the immunocyte could change, and we are reprogramming very fast, because there is this invasion. And when there is an invasion, macrophage, the immune response, innate response, need energy, fast energy, and this fast energy could be done just only by glucose. Because the organism need glucose for this, even if the production of ATP is low, but because it could be better to use phosphorylation, oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation needs the mitochondria biogenesis, is not fast. So the macrophage, when they need a lot of energy, they prefer glucose. In particular, I was very interested by what's happened in lung of COVID, because we had in that period only information of what's happened about the first coronavirus invasion, very hard, SARS was very, very hard in pneumonia. They destruct pneumonia, and there was a mortality of 20-30% in SARS. In SARS, there was an invasion in the lung, in particular the alveolus, A82 cells were the first cells to be invaded by this virus. Then, immediately after, macrophage, which are quiescent in the alveolus, turn in macrophage M1. The macrophage M1 turn immediately their metabolism in a glucolysis, very high glucolysis. They need a lot of glucose, as I told before. So when they start this production, this use of glucose, they normally produce cytokines, in particular cytokines are interleukin 6 and many other cytokines, inflammatory cytokines, which call neutrophil, platelets, and so on. This is normal reaction. Then after the infection is going to the second part, when there is a second part of the infection and the inflammation is going out, is finishing, there are the turning from macrophage M1 to macrophage M2. The macrophage M2 are anti-inflammatory, and they are particularly they desire a lot of fat in particular, because they need this for their oxidative metabolism, because macrophage 2, they produce in particular anti-inflammatory cells. But the key point, it was the macrophage M1 in people in particular with diabetes, with hypertension, with obesity, that produce a lot, an overproduction of cytokine. So for this, my hypothesis was we can do something to reduce the availability of glucose by means of a metabolic way, not therapy, not antibiotic, not antiviral, not only metabolic way. The metabolic way could help us, this was my hypothesis, to switch off the overproduction of cytokines by macrophage 1. So we started with the protocol. Meanwhile, we started with diet, ketogenic diet, natural ketogenic diet.
So let me just pause you there and just to give enough background in terms of kind of your thinking, and also clarify for the audience who might not be as up to speed on cytokines and cytokine storms. So I think one of the interesting presentations or prognosis of COVID-19 is this, as you're referring to, this upregulation of cytokine production, where it's almost like an overreaction of the immune system. For that overreaction of the immune system, that overreaction of the inflammatory system ends up hurting the patient versus helping. Even focusing on cytokine storms, are there other diseases where a cytokine storm is common? Where have we seen cytokine storms previously? And then just also on the practical level, obviously Italy was one of the first countries outside of China that was hard hit. And rewinding back to February, March, I mean, that was definitely a scary time. So can you talk us through the cytokine storm, the definitions there a little bit more, to give our audience a little bit deeper context? And also on the human side, what was it like? What did it feel like being in Italy, being in a practicing hospital? I'm sure you saw a lot of patients coming in and out. I'm sure a lot of people, unfortunately passed away and died because of the disease. What was the atmosphere like on the human side?
We have an old population. You know that Italy and Japan, the people are the nation with the oldest population in the world. In particular, in my region, Liguria region, there are about now 25% of people over 65 years old. And the people is not really in well condition. They reach, they can be old and old, but many of these are fragile. Fragile is a condition in which the people have a lot of problems, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, and so on. All these conditions, if you put also malnutrition of the elder, because the elder are also sarcopenic, and if we want to talk about sarcopenia is a condition in which the muscles are reducing because they are not used. So you put together obesity and sarcopenia, so you have sarcopenia obesity. Moreover, diabetes is very, we have approximately 12% of the population over 65 years with diabetes. Moreover, if you consider that during the infection, the diabetes is going worse because the glycemia is increasing just for obviously the inflammation, and this is very important to know for the people to control very well the glycemia during the infection. When they have fever, they must check more and more than before the glycemia, because a good control of glycemia is very important. This is another condition that the people that are seeing me now must know very well. To control, keep a tight control of glycemia is very important during this disease, but every time it's very important, in particular with COVID. In Italy, that we have a lot of people over 65, in particular in some areas where in Italy, the people live together with the grandfather, grandmother. They had the families. So the young probably they were asymptomatic COVID bringers. So I think that the disease was spreading just during December and January. Like now in August and September. In August and September, we have few cases, but those cases are the same during December and January. In December and January, we had strange pneumonias. A lot of people that have viral pneumonias. Nobody knows why. Very strange. But probably they had COVID. So you must know that from September to December, approximately 400,000 Chinese came for tourism in Italy. Moreover, we didn't know very well that the B phase evolution of the disease in that period produced false information. After 1 week, that you are not, the fever is going down, you think to be cured, to be out of the disease, recover from the disease. Differently, after 2-3 days, the fever increased, and that was a problem for people with storm, with cytokine storm. So, in my opinion, but now I would like to talk of our study that started in March, because we studied during March, April, May, June, and at the end of June, our committee approved the trial, the randomized trial. We started with a diet, a ketogenic diet. We have chosen ketogenic diet just because there were not a guideline in COVID. If people had diabetes type 1 or other kind of diabetes, so we excluded the people from this diet. But after now, in September, we restarted with the protocol randomized control trial, and probably we will have better data, better numbers. I can say to you that in the period from March to August, we have approximately 36 patients. We were very well studied. We excluded other 25 patients because they left the diet and so on. But with the 36 patients were compared with the 68 patients similar in the population of the hospital according to propensity score. I have to say that propensity score statistical technique in which the people, even if they are not randomized, could be randomized after. The people, in example, are chosen for the for the age, for the weight, for the characteristic of inflammation. So we used the 36 patients who were studied and who entered in the protocol, in the routine ketogenic diet protocol in the infectious disease unit. And after, during August, were compared to the patient of the same hospital who were not on this type of diet.
Hey guys, this is Geoff Woo interrupting my podcast for a special offer, a special announcement for you. As you might know, HVMN just launched the new keto food bar, and they're yummy, they're delicious, and I want to make a special personal offer for you to give you a discount to get those into your hands. So for a limited time only, use the discount code Geoff10. That's GEOFF number 1 number 0, Geoff10 for a 10% discount on the keto food bar on hvmn.com. We got Mexican hot chocolate, one of my personal favorites. We got vanilla shortbread, we got chocolate chunk, and of course, we got the everything bagel, which is legit savory, garlicky, oniony. And these have become staples in my own personal life. I like to eat this with a cup of coffee for breakfast. I've been using the Mexican hot chocolate, the vanilla, as grab and go bars when I'm biking, when I'm out on the town, when it's not easy for me to eat healthy, eat keto. So these are certified organic. They actually are yummy. They aren't these weird synthetic artificial tasting bars you might see that are keto compliant but have a bunch of fake IMOs and things that actually spike glycemic response. And of course, while they're also certified organic and they actually taste good, these have been tested on continuous glucose monitors, so they actually have flat glycemic response on your blood sugar. So essentially, it's a fasting mimetic, but we're still delivering almost 300 calories of healthy fat and 12 grams of healthy protein and grass-fed collagen. These are legit. I'm so excited for you to try them and use my personal discount code Geoff10 to get a special 10% discount. So check it out and enjoy, and back to the program. Can I just ask a question for clarification? So the main intervention was the ketogenic diet. So was the control group just eating the standard Italian hospital food? And what is that typical macronutrient breakdown? So question 1. And then question 2 for clarification is that I imagine that there was also other standard of care, potentially prescription drugs, pharmaceuticals that was also used in adjunct. Did you isolate out only a ketogenic diet as an intervention, or were there other drugs, other interventions applied in parallel?
Now, the first question, yes, or in the other part of the hospital, the other patient followed the standard diet, the standard Italian diet, everything in Italian Mediterranean diet. But they were in the other part of the hospital. According to the second question, yes, of course, The patient were following all the therapy that were used for every patient. They have antiviral treatment, they have normal treatment, and experimental treatment the same. The difficulty to compare the standard diet with all the other therapies, main therapies were on the group of the studied group with ketogenic diet. After this, because we have approximately 618 patients studied during all the period in our hospital. So we could choose 68 patients that were compared to the ketogenic diet. We extract all the patients just that have the same characteristic, the same inflammation, the same therapy, so that I consider it the randomized study of the poor, but it's not of the poor, obviously. The randomized study according to, it's a retrospective study, obviously, this, but a retrospective study with propensity score. That is very well accepted nowadays for considering retrospective study. Normally, supportive care is our treatment. With this differently, we consider a physiopathological treatment. What happened? We have good results. You can see that we chosen the patient, 68 patient versus 34 ketogenic diet. And the age was similar, the sex was similar, the comorbidities was similar, no differences in this. Biological parameters were similar, exactly similar, the keto diet and the standard diet. And this is the results, 30-day mortality, which is quite significant. The same in the admission in ICU. We have a reduction in the admission in ICU. We have a reduction in mortality. And moreover, there is a variation in the interleukin before and after the ketogenic diet. This is very, very interesting because the reduction of the interleukin proved that the value of the interleukin is reduced for the reducing of glucose disponibility and availability to the macrophage. Obviously, we have to be very careful because there is some contraindication on the ketogenic diet, type 1 diabetes mellitus, type 2 diabetes treated with insulin, derivative of sulfonylurea, secretagogue, analog GLP-1, GLT-2 inhibitors, recent acute cardiovascular event, food allergies, and many metabolic rare disorders or pregnancy, pancreatitis, liver failure. It's very important to know this contraindication because if not, there is some danger of use of ketogenic diet, obviously. The ketogenic diet that we used, obviously, was a normocaloric diet. We must remember that usually we use ketogenic diet for weight reduction. It's not a very low calorie, it's not a low calorie ketogenic diet. It's only eucaloric, we call eucaloric or normocaloric ketogenic diet.
So it's isocaloric to the control standard hospital food.
Exactly.
And then that would be helpful for our audience to understand, what did that food look like? Was it a lot of animal fats to make? So what was the fat ratio you were targeting? Were you targeting 70% calories from fat? And then were you measuring blood ketone levels to confirm ketosis?
No, we have no problem with triglyceride difference. There was no differences in triglyceride at the end of the study. That you have to know that now we are started with randomized control study. and many other parameters will be considered in the next future. But we have to understand that in our first study, the preliminary data are not different from the standard diet to the ketogenic diet.
So maybe repeat the question just for clarification. Did you test blood ketone levels in the ketogenic diet arm?
Sorry, what kind of blood test do you consider now?
Blood BHB to confirm ketosis. Were they 0.5 millimole BHB?
Yes,
was it 1.0 BHB, 2.0? How deep in ketosis were they?
Sorry, I tried to. No, they were in ketosis, but we used urinalysis. This
Got it.
Is quite acceptable. We prefer to use now hydroxybutyrate in the blood because it's better, hydroxybutyrate in the blood.
No, that's helpful. So you used urine, so acetoacetate urine test to confirm ketosis. And then in terms of the diet itself, what kind of ketogenic diet was it? So did you target a certain macronutrient ratio of fat? Was it a mix of vegetables, meat? Like what actually was the food? Or was it smoothies?
Yes, we try to use a Mediterranean ketogenic diet.
Got it. So a lot of olive oil?
Yes, a lot of olive oil, approximately 80 grams of olive oil. In particular, we used approximately 500 grams of fish or 400 grams of meat and cheese. We used a lot of vegetables. We used a lot of nuts. Those nuts are very interesting because they bring, they give a lot of omega-3 precursor. The actual Mediterranean diet used also nuts. Because after the PREDIMED study, the PREDIMED study is a very famous epidemiological study about Mediterranean diet. The PREDIMED diet included 5,000 people. From the pyramid study, we prefer to use nuts, about usually 30 grams of nuts per day. With our ketogenic diet, we reached approximately 60 grams per day of nuts. So it's very important to use this just also because there were a problem of compliance. The compliance of the Italian with ketogenic diets is very hard, in particular when they were in the bed during the disease. There was evolution like a bounty.
Yeah, I my sense is that as people and as companies and as people figure out how to properly eat ketogenic, it's quite I think the compliance is improving a lot over time. I think when people talked about compliance 20, 30 years ago, it sounded crazy socially and also just very hard to consume that much fat. But I think just given better understanding of how you can make high fat, low carbohydrate food, it seems that compliance is better than ever. One important thing to talk about is for your three primary endpoints, you looked at mortality, you looked at admission to ICU, you looked at interleukin 6 levels. So in the data, it says that we did not reach statistical significance.
Yes, exactly.
So was that because that we didn't have enough population size? Was it not powered enough? Was it? Do you think that it would have reached significance if we had longer N sample size, or is this just statistical noise? How do you respond to that? And is it because you're doing a second study that's more formalized, more controlled? Hopefully we get statistical significance.
Yes, we have to be very honest. The problem is that in July, the pandemic in Italy stopped. So we didn't have any other patient. When I decided to collect the data and start to the analysis, I didn't know that I hope that the pandemic will not spread in October. If not, probably we didn't start to analyze the data. I started to analyze the data because I didn't can read the future, and that's why I started with this preliminary evaluation. If not, all our efforts could be lost. The problem, the weakness of the study is that we reach almost statistically significant, but we have this weakness that we couldn't add more data because the experiment, this was not an experiment, it was experience, stopped. So for honesty, we decide to write the paper. Now we are going to send the paper to be evaluated for the publication with this weakness of the power. We have a power little because we have only 36 patients, obviously. But we are going now with a randomized control trial. Unluckily, in this moment, we have a lot of patients. Tomorrow will be locked down once more. In particular, our region will be a new lockdown. And we don't know really when we'll be finished with this problem because I don't know really if the vaccine will be helpful. I hope to, but it's very difficult to think that coronavirus. If you consider that, in example, I had I had the disease in February, the end of February. And thank God I use this, not ketogenic, because I don't usually use ketogenic diet. I usually eat a lot of fish, a lot of vegetables, a lot of olive oil and fruit. Obviously, in that period, I didn't have a good appetite. Moreover, after I lost all my appetite, I have eugeusia, that in that period nobody considered it like a very important symptom of COVID-19 is a terrible disease according to the pleasure of the kitchen, because after 15 days you lose in the 30% the pleasure of taste every kind of food and smell for a long time. Moreover, I used also to introduce also arginine. Usually I use arginine because it's about 33 years or 4 years that I add powder for arginine just to improve
nitrous oxide.
Nitrous oxide, exactly. Usually I do. So I make a lot of sport. I running every day, 15 minutes on the treadmill before going to work. That is very important. We have to consider that the COVID-19 could be defeated also with this. Obviously, very important is the sun. Usually I go during all my time in the mountains to run, and so I have a lot of sun exposure. And this is very important for vitamin D.
Yep.
Many old people forget it. Forget to do this. It's terrible. If you remember, 1 century ago, all the people who have tuberculosis stay all the day under the sun. We have forgot that the sun is very important for all the disease, all the infectious disease, because vitamin D modify the receptor of the cells, in particular in tuberculosis, and can control the infection, just improving the receptors.
Yeah.
So vitamin D, sun exposure, physical activity more than sport. Physical activity is less than sport. Sport, it could be dangerous because hard sport increase oxidation, production of superoxides, and so on. Physical activity is good. The animal doesn't make sport. They prefer physical activity every day, and we must consider this. So, considering my experience, I can say that even if ketogenic diet is not, it could be also not necessary obliged for people with diabetes in particular, a very low intake of glucose and carbohydrates is very useful for these people during COVID-19. So even if we can't reach the ketosis, in my opinion, a very, very tight control of glycemia and a very tight control of intake of glucose is very important.
Yeah, 100% agree with you in terms of directionally. I think this is a very sensible nutritional adjunct. I think your experience, in a hospital as patients are coming in, as patients are dying, I think it's also helpful for our audience to understand how hard it is to run a clinical trial through an actual pandemic with actual people's life on the lines. And I think it's sometimes very easy for people on the sidelines saying, hey, they should have gotten statistical significance, or why didn't they do all this other things? And you have to realize that these are real people with real families. People are dying. It's not always super easy to, run a rat experiment where you can have 1,000 rats, put them in completely separate boxes, and then, completely, chop them apart to look at every single organ, every single tissue. These are real humans. Yeah. You can't do all of that aggressive intervention there. So, my sense here is that clearly a cleaner diet with lower refined carbohydrate intake seems very sensible in terms of what you're referring to in terms of just like glycemic control, especially because of all the comorbidities with insulin resistance, diabetes, obesity, all have some root cause with overconsumption of carbohydrate or glucose. So I think even just minimizing or reducing refined carbohydrate intake seems very sensible. And I think at least this is a positive sign that all things the same in terms of standard of care, potentially trying a ketogenic diet probably will not harm the patient unless there's, of course, like the very clear contraindications. But in terms of like what I do personally, if I had COVID, I would definitely very strongly consider going very strict on a ketogenic diet, given the data I've seen. I think your work here wasn't statistically significant, but was directionally interesting enough where I don't see a lot of risk, but I could potentially see a lot of benefit from eating a ketogenic diet. So hope you are able to collect more data and have a more definitive standard of care that we could potentially update across hospitals around the world. Because I think it's still a very open question, open challenge of what is the best standard of care to help support our civilization, like the human tribe.
I agree with you.
So looking forward, as you're looking at a second clinical trial to study this more in depth, any other practical tips and takeaways from Italy, from your also personal struggle through COVID? I'm excited to see the potential and the additional data around a ketogenic approach to resolving upper respiratory diseases. And I think the cytokine storm theory is a very interesting mechanism that we can target. And I think it sounds like exactly like the study that you've shown is a very positive first step for the scientific community to really understand cytokine storms, acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, another synonym or related concept to cytokine storm. I think the ketogenic approach is potentially very, very helpful there. So hopefully, your work there continues to shine light on this scientific pathway. As we wrap up here, any other interventions you are particularly excited about? Any other practical takeaways and tips? I know that sunlight, making sure vitamin D status is robust, some physical activity, moving around, obviously consider a nutritional component. Anything else you have observed within your clinical practice, treating and talking to patients, that seems to bode better for outcomes? Any other patterns, any other hypotheses or experiments to consider?
Yes, we will try. If I had another possibility to make another study, I would like to use also hydroxybutyrate. Hydroxybutyrate, because there are very interesting studies of Bradshaw and other people that suggest that this ketone could be useful just for the breathing. Yes, they would improving the breath after intake of hydroxybutyrate. it could be very useful to start. And now we're starting now just with experimental treatment with hydroxybutyrate in rehabilitation of COVID-19, because you must consider that after COVID-19 ICU, the recovering in ICU for COVID-19, there are a lot of dysphagia and respiratory defeats that we are trying to study. I started just with a little protocol, a protocol with a pneumologist, just to evaluate the usefulness of hydroxybutyrate intake, just for evaluating the respiratory function.
Yeah, no, I think that's exciting hypothesis, right? So, beta hydroxybutyrate, exogenous ketones. Exactly. I think that would be exciting to see whether the benefit of a ketogenic diet is from the restriction of carbohydrate, restriction of glucose, or is it the actual benefit of ketones themselves? My suspicion is that it's a little bit of both, but your study will actually be definitive, or at least help give us real data to adjust our hypotheses, adjust our thinking here. So that's an exciting prospect.
Just for this, we started with a collaboration for evaluate only hydroxybutyrate in the blood, because useful. Many kids evaluate only acetoacetate, which is not very useful in controlling ketogenic diet, because ketogenic diet started a lot later, not really later, but later than the control of ketoacidosis. But ketoacidosis is completely another word. We have really to differentiate ketoacidosis and ketosis. I saw just 2 months ago a terrible paper written considering that ketosis is a disease complicating COVID-19. I think it was crazy, the people who've written this, because ketosis compare with ketoacidosis is a nonsense. Ketosis is ketosis. Ketoacidosis is a complication of diabetes with acidosis with ketosis, but not the disease caused by ketosis. Ketosis is a normal physiological increase of ketones, and ketones are probably one of the most important energy suppliers of the body from all the animals during fasting, as you know. So to use ketones is normal for many animals, like cats that use a lot of ketones because they don't have carbohydrates in their food, and their liver is particularly used to use the ketones, and most of our brain is using ketones and muscles after 2 days, after 3 days, so we don't have problems. Obviously, the problem is that we have to consider a ketogenic diet also in an health manner. And if you consider that fat, most of the fat are dangerous. Fat are dangerous if the intake is high, in particular saturated fat. So we have to choose a ketogenic diet, a Mediterranean type of ketogenic diet. But if we use a Mediterranean type of ketogenic diet, we are going to the same good wellness guidelines of using a normal, equilibrated, normal glucidic, normal caloric diet. We studied in particular the people with epilepsy. They need for a long time ketogenic diet, eucaloric ketogenic diet. We studied people with deficit of GLUT2, that is the transporter of glucose. So they are obliged to follow ketogenic diet for all their life. I have a lot of epileptic patients. They had epilepsy, drug-resistant epilepsy. In drug-resistant epilepsy, ketogenic, eucaloric, Mediterranean diet does not provoke increase of triglyceride and cholesterol. They have the same value of normal people. But you have to consider that in the long period, we have to choose very good and equilibrated source of fats. That's the problem of a good ketogenic diet. If you eat all the day meat from veal, meat and not fish or eggs or cheese, probably you will have problems. Now we have problems with discussing about fat from cheese and fat from meat. In Europe, we consider that, in particular in Holland and the Netherlands, they consider that there are a lot of studies about the utility of fat from cheese, better than the fat from cows and so on. Anyways.
Yeah, no, I think that's just like a very exciting area of research where the animal saturated story, I think the more traditional heart cardiovascular doctors would say, hey, be careful of over consumption of saturated fat. But I would also say there's new studies that suggest that saturated fat alone or LDL alone is not predictive or causative of cardiovascular disease risk. So I think it's a little bit of an open academic debate in terms of, is saturated fat truly causative of cardiovascular disease risk? But I think I agree with your core point there, which is that there is still more work to be done in terms of understanding the optimal fat ratios as you're deciding a diet, especially a ketogenic diet, where you're obviously increasing the amount of fat one is consuming. But in general, at least it sounds like there is some directional data here that going on a ketogenic diet is likely going to be at least neutral, if not potentially helpful for a COVID-19 bout. So on that front, that's something that I think more people should know about. And I think I know that a lot of people on Twitter, on social media who are in the low carb community have speculated on potential benefit of ketogenic diet or ketones for COVID-19. But I haven't really seen people actually do the work, collect the data. And my understanding, I don't know if this is correct, but it sounds like you might have collected the first data on really trying to see if there's some relationship or some benefit there. So if that is the case, that is very exciting from leading the charge from a scientific front, as well as just answering questions. I think end of the day, I think the world just wants to know, what is the best diet for a COVID-19 course? And if it doesn't work, then great. We know that we don't need to use a ketogenic diet. If it does work, then we could potentially help a lot of people here. So keep up the good fight. To your knowledge, are there other people looking and actually running studies, or are you one of the early leaders here? And then two, what are the thoughts of your colleagues? And excited to see when this gets published through, because it will be interesting to see if the journals will accept it, given the low power. But hey, I think this information is still useful in practice.
Yes, there are other possibilities. You must consider that COVID-19 is a fight against a disease that interests people, also malnourished people. You must consider that the people is malnourished must be controlled with hypercaloric. That I don't think that during COVID-19 we have to use hypercaloric diet, in particular when the people is in the ICU. The ICU guidelines nowadays suggest not hypo, but quite hypocaloric diet. A very interesting area is the control of microbiome. Microbiome, it could be very interesting because probably microbiome could modify the immune response from the lung, because microbiome interferes with the immune response. This in a really very interesting, but nobody knows really about this. There are some studies, which are considering a modification of microbiome with TGF-beta. It could be very interesting, this, but they are still in the starting. According to the other studies, it's very important to consider also the choice of the proteins. In particular, in my opinion, whey proteins, like supplements, which are very useful for malnourished people. And when we are going to use an enteral nutrition or supportive nutrition, in particular in sarcopenic patient, all the sarcopenic patient might be supported also with whey protein that are very rich of, as I told before, brain chain amino acids, but even because they have a good content of glutamine. Glutamine is very important during infection. Glutamine is useful for alternative route of gluconeogenesis, but also for production of substances during the production of membranes and so on.
Yeah, I think it's clearly like a lot of work to be done in terms of the best nutritional protocol to help prevent and use as a nutritional adjunct for the recovery from COVID. So maybe to wrap up here, what are you most excited about, whether it's your current research thread in terms of studying the ketogenic diet directly, looking at exogenous ketones, those two topics, and then if there is a place where people, our listeners, can follow your work. Are you on social media, or how do people follow along and see the publications as your work comes out?
If they want to check my publication, you can find on nutrition, yes, where I publish the hypothesis. I don't know where now we are going to print the next paper that it is ongoing. I think in the same nutrition journal. I have a page where usually I can communicate. It's my page on Facebook. And moreover, obviously, there are other ways to communicate by means of our society, the Italian Society of Clinical Nutritionists.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to walk through and share your experience, both on the front lines as well as pushing our understanding of metabolism, cytokine storms, and COVID-19. It's really important work, and thank you for sharing.
I apologize for the inconvenience, and particularly in my accent or in my English, but I hope that I could be understood by everybody.
100%. Yeah. Ultimately, I think the ideas and the science principles are what's most important. So that definitely came through, and your passion, your excitement here definitely came through. So again, Professor Sukkar, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much. See you. Bye.